my name is Alberg, my pronouns are they, them, and I am a natural dyer and herbalist and knitwear designer, and I live in Winnipeg with my gigantic dog. Yeah, so I've been running my own business since 2018, I think, and it's kind of a combo of the natural dyeing and the knitwear design, and I've just increasingly immersed myself into the local fibre shed world, which is like the local textile movement, and part of that, and also just part of being a nerd, has been studying my local color palette, which, because we're here in the north, has required going way more into the science of plants than would if we lived somewhere further south. And then that has just kind of like naturally transitioned over into also studying my own ancestral dye plants, and then by extension when I'm teaching classes, being able to help my students make connections with their own ancestral dye plants, and then how that rolls over into herbalism as well, because you end up having to know so much about the chemistry of the plants in terms of whether or not they're going to be a good dye. Also then just kind of naturally gives you the information about what their roles are in terms of their medicinal uses, which then also leads you into their cultural uses and their history, and it's super fun and super nerdy and just never ending. So I come from a theater background, and arts has just always been the world that I have lived in. And I also come from grassroots activism, especially in the queer community. And when I was in my early 20s, I burned out hardcore. And when I kind of was slowly getting my feet back into it, I realized that textiles is a world where literally everything overlaps, like labor rights, gender rights, environmental sustainability, everything overlaps in textiles. And even when you're completely exhausted, the clothing that we put on our bodies is part of gender expression, of course, and cultural expression and all of these things, but it's also just a way of performing our values on a daily basis, and also taking into account, what capacity do we have, what privileges do we have, what's accessible to us. And so being on, the designer and business end of that is also for me figuring out, okay, how can I share this with people? How can I help educate them so that they can make more informed choices based on what they have accessible? And then also just kind of like get people thinking about it more, not in terms of there being like a right or wrong way, but just making a choice based on having actual information and knowing what questions to ask and where to start looking. I primarily dye Canadian wool, and I work with small Canadian farms and also some bigger Canadian farms, and then mills within Canada. And so I'm working with entirely Canadian sourced and milled fibers, which is a fun kind of thing in and of itself. But then I also dye fabrics, not so much for the business side of things, but just for my own uses. And so depending on what type of fiber I'm using, then the preparation of it needs to be a little different. And then also dyeing yarn versus fabric is different. So yeah, I guess on the business side of things, as the business has grown and I've been dyeing more larger quantities, then it's also kind of forced me to start making different decisions about, what do I have access to, what is environmentally responsible for me to be using. And so I rely pretty heavily on Mewa, who they are on the West Coast, and they work with farms and harvesters around the world to bring in like large quantities of dye plants ethically, which is great. But then I also do my best to grow my own and forage what I can and work with local farms, and other, like my neighbors will, bring me their marigolds and things like that. And so it's been really interesting. And as I've been in my home for longer, then I've been slowly kind of expanding the gardens that are here, getting to know my local flora and fauna on dog walks. And so I've been, over the years, been able to see like, oh, okay, that nettle patch comes back every year. And oh, by the river, then we have some bits of goldenrod. And so that's also been really cool, just in terms of getting to see like what comes back each year. And then also for myself, knowing, okay, I can grow this amount probably each year. And so then making my plans accordingly in terms of what am I going to dye with it. And if I get a really great year, fabulous. It means that I can have, you know, a few extra special batches. And then if I can't, then okay, that just means that this year we don't get that particular color, or we don't use that particular plant. And you know, building an audience and educating my customer base at least to understand that like this is why we make these decisions. And then when I'm teaching others how to work with natural dyes, like this is part of it. You know, we're working with natural products, and you know that there's true abundance and true scarcity that we have to be negotiating with, which is honestly true all of the time. But I think the natural products and being so reliant on climate in such like a very direct way forces us to be more aware of it. And then by extension with my herbal products, it's the same thing, right? Like if we don't get a good crop one year of a certain kind of a plant, then I can't use it. And so, you know, then figuring out, okay, if I can't use it, does it mean that I just don't make that year? Or is there a different plant that actually is maybe able to do it in a similar way, or a dye plant that's going to give me a similar color, and just kind of becoming more aware of those things myself. And then, yeah, by extension, making other people aware of it too. I also sell physical products and digital products. So if you're a knitter, then you can find knitting patterns. If you are interested in natural dyeing, then I have natural dye supplies and also natural dyeing PDFs and things that kind of walk you through the steps. And then I sell salves and soaps and teas and lip balms and things that I've formulated. And then, of course, the naturally dyed yarns. It's a fairly wide-ranging product line, but especially on the herbalism side of things, I don't add something to the line that isn't very directly related to like being really useful. So like my most popular item is my Knitter's Joint Salve, which I formulated years ago to help with my own arthritis, but it's good for all aches and pains. And then when I was like, okay, what's the next natural thing to expand out to? That's where the healing salve came in. And so it's for skin issues, but it was because I kept on getting bug bites and stings from my nettles when I would go to harvest them. And so I was like, okay, what do I do for this? So it's like a fairly curated line, but yeah, all natural products and no preservatives. And so depending on the ingredients, then they have shelf lives of anywhere from a year to over 3 years. I've pretty much always been teaching, actually, and running workshops. The natural dyeing, I teach folks how to work with natural dyes, and in the class we'll actually like do the dyeing, go through the different steps, but then also talk about like the ethics of it and how to source different dyes, and you know, where are some books that people can get, you know, continue their studies, because you're never going to learn natural dyeing from a single session or from a single teacher, and so I want folks to be able to learn from reliable sources that are actually teaching them how to do it, and also from folks who don't only look like me, because natural dyeing is done literally all around the world. It is what up until about 100 years ago we used across the world for all of our colors on our cloth. And so that's really cool, but also it's been 100 years, and so people have forgotten. And so connecting folks to different people is kind of my goal there. And then I also teach the knitwear design, and then I also teach knitting with natural yarns, so that for folks that are interested in working with more minimally processed yarns and with naturally dyed yarns, there can be a bit of a learning curve. And so kind of teaching them like what makes them special, how do you use them, how do you substitute them into your favorite patterns. And so I teach those in person again and before, and I teach them, there's pre-recorded classes that you can just kind of walk yourself through, available on my website all the time. And then I also teach live but digital versions for different organizations like Vogue and Knit City. And then I also teach in schools. So I'll be working with several schools this upcoming year through the Artists in Schools program with Manitoba Arts Council, which is going to be a lot of fun as well. I really like working with kids. The biggest thing is be financially smart about it. I think we always need to be open to learning all the time for our entire lives. Just be prepared to fall on your face all the time and get back up and keep going. But make sure that you're doing it within a reasonable budget.